summer on a Rise Play.
We're running on the right track. I know we never gonna look back. Oh, I just wanna have a good time. Call me whatever.
I like this.
Sing like, party like. To the beat till we freak out. Sing like, party like, freaking out. To the beat till we freak out. Sing like.
We're adding new titles every day to our awesome collection of blockbuster movies. Download the app and subscribe. This isn't just a streaming channel. This is a bold new world of entertainment. A Rise Play. Beyond streaming. This summer on a Rise Play.
Tonight we're running on the right track. I know we never gonna look back. Oh, I just wanna have a good time. Call me whatever.
I like this.
Sing like, party like. To the beat till we freak out. Sing like, party like, freaking out. To the beat till we freak out. Sing like.
We're adding new titles every day to our awesome collection of blockbuster movies. Download the app and subscribe. This isn't just a streaming channel. This is a bold new world of entertainment. A Rise Play. Beyond streaming.
Welcome to This Week, 60 minutes of analytical review of the big stories, topical issues, and all the controversies around the world. I'm Somna Sambo. Coming up on the program today, Nigerian governors express shock over President Buhari's assent to the petroleum industry bill, despite calls for inclusion of their views, seek urgent amendment of the new law. Buhari promises to defeat insecurity before he leaves office in 2023. Warns he may rejig the nation's security architecture if the military fails to deliver results. Reactions trail presidency's attempt to revive grazing routes in 25 states of the federation. And Taliban's struggle for legitimacy as Afghans continue protests against their rule. President Muhammadu Buhari's government has taken historical steps by assenting the petroleum industry bill. This makes it a legal document that will reform Nigeria's oil and gas sector and enhance transparency. The bill has been in the works for about 2 decades, and the country lost an estimated $50 billion worth of investments due to its non-passage and the lack of political will, all in 10 years. But state governors are unhappy that their views were excluded from the final law. The governors had written Buhari to halt the assent for inclusion of their views to prevent a legal crisis. They claim the law will deny states their fair share from the federation account because it favors the federal government and the NNPC, which will transform into a limited liability company. They also faulted the removal of the requirement to transfer payments into the federation account as unconstitutional. Chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, Kayode Fayemi, in an exclusive chat with Arise News, says a political solution is on the way for the new law. All right. Joining me to look at the new Petroleum Industry Act is an APC chieftain here, Osita Okechukwu, who's one of our guests who usually comes around. And then we also have an energy expert, Body Showumi. Good to have you, gentlemen. Now, let's start with what this means to Nigerians. Let me start with you, Bode. What does this mean for Nigerians? And then what does it also mean for the petroleum industry, considering that, you know, there were allegations over the years that even IOCs didn't want this bill to be passed?
Thank you. I think to understand where we are, we need to understand where we're coming from. I think basically the PIA, which was the PIA being metamorphosized, is basically an answer to the call for greater transparency in the industry, greater reforms within the industry, a more productive industry, and an industry that will attract investment. This is based on what had happened in '99 when there was reforms within the telecom sector, which was the more successful one, and of course similar reforms within the power sector. But because such a reform could not happen within the oil and gas industry, it was suggested that the whole framework be rejigged so that it will make it more attractive, more transparent. At the beginning in 2008, when the initial bill came up, it did not favor the aspirations of the IOCs, and they raised some concerns, but that was quickly overcome. But the bigger problem lied in host communities and the related political association. I mean,
including the 30% fund for the frontier basins and all of that.
Yes, yes. But it's good to understand what all those means and all that. Now, what had now happened in the end was that those solutions, although not perfect, they were arrived at within certain circumstances. And one of the things it does to the average person on the street, like you said, we have missed more than conservatively $50 billion. But is it not coincidental that during the time that we were dilly-dallying was when oil was discovered in Ghana, gas was discovered in Mozambique, oil discovered in Liberia, Uganda, and co. by the same actors? So it is possible that the investment that was supposed to come into Nigeria was taken into those places. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. Now, the key areas, you understand, where is causing the controversy, unfortunately, is the least impactful to the industry. Because we must realize that if we don't have an industry that is stable, all the things we want to gain by part of the national cake does not exist. So what has now happened is that the 3% that we're talking about happens to be 3% of operational cost. In other words, the cost, if ExxonMobil, for example, is going to invest $100 billion for the purposes of an oil well, 3% of that comes to the host communities. What they need to understand, what they need to realize is that even if you make it 10% or 18% or whatever percentage, it is still part of the cost of operations. And it makes us
very interesting indeed. So, well, you can see, just like he has said, the governors are more interested in what comes out of it for them. But of course, the most important thing Nigerians should focus on is the investment. Because if you do not get the much needed investment, then you cannot have all your percentages, whether the host communities or the governors, going to FAC and all of that. What do you think should be done right now to ensure that we do not have a legal crisis between the governors and the presidency?
Let me start from where he stopped. The fact is that there's a law governing the oil and gas industry, we should clap and thank Mr. President, because the oil industry have been opaque. Opaque in the sense that transparency was not adhered to. Today is now a business-oriented enterprise. It's no more NNPC corporation, it's now NNPC company. And the Ministry of Finance that represents Nigerian people also represent the governors. So the governors cannot distance the Nigerian state from the governors. There's no thin line. Mr. President is Mr. President of the country. Whoever comes tomorrow as President of the country will administer those funds in liaison with the revenue sharing formula that from one point or the other. Today is in the neighborhood of about 47, because most governors control that of 20 of the states, while the state has 26. The local government has about 20 points, and the federal government has about 52 points. So for the governor's argument, you start asking yourself, are they operating in the universe or outside the shores of the country? What they should talk about is the transparency of the funding and the implementation of the PIA.
Okay, very interesting indeed.
Yes.
But the areas that they're actually worried about is the status of the Federation account. With the new NNPC Limited, from its wording, especially if you look at it, it looks like it's more focused and it's going to be, teleguided by the Ministry of Finance. And they are saying that the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, where they also have shares, should have been the controlling agency, not the Ministry of Finance. What do you make of the wordings and then this?
I'm not an expert in law, so I'm not able to really speak to the legality of that. But I can say this: NNPC Limited will not be the first or the only MDA, department or agency of government, that's a limited liability company. So, NBET, Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, is a limited liability company, and it's a government agency. The same thing as the sovereign wealth funds. Now, in those companies, it is 100% owned by a subset of the Ministry of Finance called the Minister of Finance Incorporated. Basically, the Ministry of Finance is the finance arm of the federal government. So that's my understanding of how that operates. Albeit, it should be understood that whether it is a limited liability company or a corporation, in terms of essence, in terms of the ethos of operation, there's nothing that has changed from how NNPC has been operating over the decades. It has all the while been a federal government interest. Now, the question to be asked is that in the 2 years that there have been public hearings and all that, I am not aware that the governors or representative of the Governors Forum has made any presentation.
Well, I asked Governor Fayemi about that. He said they made some presentations. They actually met with the oil and gas joint committees and all of that, even spoke with the leadership of the National Assembly. They are surprised that their views were not reflected. I mean,
I'm not aware of that because those are public hearings.
Okay.
But when you say public hearings, it means that the whole public are there. So everybody that made a presentation, and they are recorded. So anybody that made a presentation is there. So it is possible, maybe their presentation was when some of us were not in there or they excluded from, but there needs to be evidence that they made those presentations. But whether they made those presentations or not, those are not even really the issues. The issues is that they have these concerns. And the question would be, how do they want to express those concerns in a law that has been passed?
Okay, very interesting indeed. We'll just have to go on a short break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. You're still watching This Week. Just stay with us as we go on a short break. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Somna Sambo, and we're still taking a look at the signing of the Historic Petroleum Industry Act by President Muhammadu Buhari and the issues that, it has all thrown up. And I still have with me here Bode Showumi, who's an energy expert, and Osita Okechukwu, who's a chieftain of the ruling All Progressives Congress. Now, I would just want us to listen to Governor Fayemi as he was talking about that issue, so that we'll put it in proper perspective as to what the governors are actually arguing about.
When we got a whiff of what was contained in the original draft, particularly in the Senate, because the Senate passed it first, we had immediately reached out to the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, and he graciously put me in touch with Senator Nakudu, who was the chairman of the ad hoc committee, the joint committee responsible for this exercise. And Senator Nakudu immediately said, please send us your concerns, which I sent to him personally, and he acknowledged. And he said, we'll look into it and we'll come back to you. And that was the last we had. But of course, one of our own senators then came back to me to say, the concerns have not been reflected, because I also sent it to some of our own people who are members in the committee and said, look.
All right. Well, that was the last we heard. When you hear those kind of assertions, Osita, what do you think it means? Because it looks like the governors made an attempt to ensure that even after the passage by both houses, they write Buhari, and after writing Buhari, they were still bounced back again. The president just went ahead to sign this bill into law without listening to them. So the National Assembly ignored them, and here they are saying that the presidency also ignored them. What do you make of all of this?
My understanding of my score for the PIA is the fact that it will encourage transparency. Transparency is key to the management of our resources. In 2007, for instance, the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee met in Abuja here and disagreed because they couldn't find where the signature bonus of the previous year to 2007. And they even wrote to Mr. President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. And there were other oil bills and accounts that were questionable. But I'm thinking that since we are now gone more corporate in management of oil affairs, like the Saudi Aramco and the others, there will be auditors that will be stringent in using the best practices in trying to look into the funds, accruals that comes into the kitty. Definitely, the Ministry of Finance Incorporation is the Ministry of Finance of the Federal Government of Nigeria, where the governors have shares. They represent the governors.
No, they said that the Ministry of Finance Incorporated is actually going to be representing the interests of the federal government.
No, it doesn't make sense.
And not the entire federation.
No, it
so
doesn't.
That's why they want it domiciled in the Nigerian Sovereign Investment
When
Authority.
they were managing the VAT, because inland revenue is under the Federal Ministry of Finance, when they were managing the VAT, was it not being shared? They were the accruals to the Federal Government of Nigeria. Please, let us first and foremost agree that we have a country called the country, Nigeria. We must repose confidence in what is going on. Even the oil communities, what I ask them is, look at the transparency content of the act. Because that transparency content will save us a lot of hassles. If you want to be fraudulent, whether the governors are part of it or not, a fraudulent regime will find a way to pay for the funds. So they shouldn't bother about that. What they should bother is how transparent would the implementation of the act. Because if it's transparent, it's going to be win-win for the sectors. There's already a revenue
Very
sharing formula.
indeed.
Nobody will walk
but the governors are saying that the new NNPC Limited is going to be a very powerful behemoth. But I, apart from all of these observations by the governors, the ordinary Nigerian will want to understand how fast these reforms will happen. We've seen a PIA implementation committee put in place by the government, and they have 12 months to work. And another question that the ordinary Nigerian wants to know is what happens to the controversial subsidy payments. Does this mean that pretty soon, under 1 year or 6 months, as we have been told, NNPC Limited will come into being, that petrol prices will go up?
I think what is important to note is why things are being done, and that way we can identify with the positive or negative. The oil industry is a global industry, and the players in those places are behemoths, whether it's Saudi Aramco, whether it's ExxonMobil, whether it is Shell. Now, if a player is going to come out of Nigeria, it needs to be of a certain size to be able to contest with its peers. That is the original thinking why NNPC was not dismembered. And when you talk about an integrated oil and gas industry, so you talk about an oil company that deals in both upstream operations, midstream, and downstream. And that is the thinking behind retaining an NNPC so that it is of that size. Some of the arguments, we need to put it alongside. Oil and gas industry is not the only place where federal government has companies. TCN in the power sector belongs to the federal government. It is not shared with the states. FRS within the finance sector, customs, you understand? You can name it, health, everywhere. They are not shared with the states. But the issue is really what is governance? How should governance play? Because these are real fundamental politics. What happens is that the income goes into the federation account. And in the federation account, there's a sharing formula, which includes the states, the federal government, and the local government. So the argument that they are making for the states can also be made for the local government. And then the question is, where will we go?
Okay, and the subsidy issue.
Okay, finally, the subsidy issue.
Yeah.
One of the good things that this thing does is that it gives us a framework for transparency. As at today, no one really knows what subsidy is. No one really knows if we are paying subsidy. 3 times we've been told that subsidy has been removed, and then we hear things like under recovery. So we need to actually know what our landing cost is in a verifiable manner. The keyword here being verifiable. The cost of crude is international, is verifiable. The cost of transportation is international, is verifiable. The cost of refining is international, is verifiable. So let the figures that determine the landing price be made public. Let it be interrogated, and then alone will we know if we are really even paying subsidy. Because even when the
or whether the new NNPC Limited will be the one that will handle all of these issues. Yeah. Well, how much of a big political win is this for the governing All Progressives Congress? Because this law has been on for so many years and it wasn't signed.
I once told them, there are a lot of people that are so fixated. Whatever Mr. President does, whether it's good for the country, collectively or not, they will criticize it. Otherwise, I could have said that kudos should go to Mr. President and the National Assembly for trying to enter the lane of transparency. Because when you are in OPEC, clouded financial management, nobody wins except very few. So today, we can interrogate better the NNPC company than NNPC Corporation. Those authorities can be better interrogated, regulatory agencies can be better interrogated than before. So I think we are moving to the right direction. Yes,
except that when the pump price of fuel eventually rises up to maybe worry. 380, like the governors have been canvassing, it looks like your government is going to be in trouble.
Whether it goes low or high, transparency is the key. That is the truth of the matter.
You think the APC is not worried that if the price of fuel goes up to 380 or 400 has been canvassed, that may cost you the 2023
It might not
election?
go so if the security agencies, especially the customs, because it is always absurd to let us know that we are filtering away more tonnage of fuel outside the country. And I've been to almost all the countries in the sub-region, and I don't see the number of vehicles I have. Most of them, their vehicles is not up to that of vehicles.
All right, very interesting indeed. We must thank you, Osita Okechukwu, for that very insightful discussion there. And then Bodisha Umi, just that we'll have to let you go this time around, but most thank you for coming on the show. Well, that's how it's been for this segment, and then we'll now move on to other issues. As the Buhari administration continues to face security challenges, we will get to see what the president is doing and how he intends to end his remaining 2 years in power. Stay with us as we go on break. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Somna Sambo. The Buhari administration continues to face security challenges 6 years after being in power, despite being one of its major campaign promises. With less than 2 years before the end of his statutory 2 terms in office, the president is blowing hot and promising to secure the nation before he exits in 2023. At a security meeting with his service chiefs, President Buhari warned that he won't hesitate to sack any of them or disband the entire team if they fail to secure the nation. The National Security Advisor, Babagana Munguno, who briefed journalists at the State House after the meeting, says the president commended the security agencies over the recent successes recorded so far. Let's listen to him.
Is quite happy that there's been tremendous success, especially with the advent of the new service chiefs and the Inspector General of Police, and he's also made it very, very clear that he's not ready to exit government as a failure. He's not going to tolerate that. He's made changes and is ready to make further changes if he's not satisfied. He's completely determined to ensure that there's a turnaround in the fortunes in the theater of operations.
Well, I still have with me here in the studio Osita Okechukwu, who is the chieftain of the All Progressives Congress, and would want to go to this commendation. I mean, a lot of Nigerians were surprised that for the very first time, President Muhammadu Buhari is commending his security chiefs and giving them kudos on the back, but also firing a warning shot that if they do not sit up and protect the nation to secure the country before its exit, then he may be forced to actually do a change in that sector. What do you make of that?
I think that Mr. President, like every one of us, is worried on the security situation in the country because it's a big challenge. He's trying to kind of demarket the economy, demarket the farming industry, lead to food insecurity, and almost dislocate the country. So Mr. President, I think, is sounding good, and I hope and pray that the security agencies will listen. The only major score that one could identify from what General Mogonu said is that there seems to be synergy between the agencies. Because when it was General Brutal and the others, he complained as well. General Mogonu complained that there was no synergy. And if you don't have synergy between the arms, naturally, you have problems. So I think that the synergy he identified will be of tremendous help to improvement in the security architecture, because a police sergeant somewhere, if he liaises well with the captain at the other end, the captain will be well armed, because except to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So I think that everybody's significantly bothered about the security challenge facing the country. And Mr. President had demonstrated both to the fact that if you know what it means to purchase super Kano aircrafts and other equipment that nobody can mention, because the point about the security is that if you are the one managing the Nigerian security architecture, there are little you could say. At the cost of even becoming unpopular, there are some amounts of some equipment you cannot mention you purchased, either because you want to preserve the officers and men that are using those equipment, or you do not even want to alert your enemies that you are in possession of such equipment.
But very interesting. A lot of critics have said that he seems to have been referring to most of these Boko Haram commanders and members who are coming to surrender to the Nigerian military. But what of internal security situation? Look at the crisis in Jos last weekend. By this time around, I mean, there was outcry killing of innocent passengers. Look at, I mean, we are just hearing of Ife Modakeke starting up again. And then, go around the country, kidnapping, and then this banditry all going around. Apart from that war on insurgency and terrorism in the Northeast, which seems to be going down, don't you think that the internal security procedures need to be ramped up to go side by side?
Sometimes, about 30 years ago, especially in 1986, Professor Bode, Nzimiro, late Klarake, and others warned the Nigerian states that the economic path we are trying to follow, where they say government had no business in business, that they had to go into this structural adjustment program, they warned. They said, by the time states distance itself from the welfare of the citizenry, that we are going to see the kind of event we are seeing today. What were the arguments? The argument was simply, they said that the private sector we are relying on is not mature to the nature to absorb a huge population that we're in. That some of those captains of industries have no one factory. If they have factories, they could have been employing a lot of people. So a lot of hands will remain unemployed in the next years ahead. So you are going to be seeing similar instances everywhere, because they said an angry man is a hungry man.
So it's the lack of economic opportunities is contributing to internal security challenges.
Fail,
is that what you're saying?
Yes, if we fail to return governance and resource of the state to the people, we're likely to see the event going on.
But is it not a slap on this government that the government inherited the farmer-herder clashes, and we're still having places like Jos having this internal crisis continuously and these killings, and it looks like there is no help anywhere, and these villagers just keep killing themselves here and there.
It's very painful.
It's a big challenge.
Nobody can defend the pains in every village of the country, in every community. Some farmers are left the farms. We are pained about that, but what I'm saying, with the synergy now going on between the security agencies, we are going to most likely see a change and turn of events. Why? Because there seems to be kind of a scatter diagram. But this scatter diagram is what General Mongoni is saying, that bringing back to piece together, to remind both the paramilitary, you have enough to contribute in terms of information sharing. The citizenry, you have enough to contribute in terms of information sharing. And we have to come to learn from what is going on. That when you are in your neighborhood and you leave the other child going astray, you are not being helpful to yourself, you are not being helpful to the community. I remember when we were growing up, you might be misbehaving somewhere, and another parent will come and hit you. Why are you doing this? Today, we've lost that culture. If he hits another child, he runs back to the mother or the father. If you're not taking care, they will come fighting in your house.
Very interesting.
So all these are collective that we have
to... but I mean, President Buhari's critics have just said that he's blowing hot air. That, I mean, if you couldn't achieve a lot of security results since 2015 for 6 years now, is it less than 2 years that he has that he'll be able to hand over a secured nation to Nigeria? No, and they seem to be making some points there.
They're not very correct. Mr. President, as a human being, must have learned from some of the mistakes. There's no government on earth.
And what kind of mistakes would that be?
One, that there were times when the agencies were not cooperating. Can Mr. President be in Abuja and be in Gashua? Or be in Enugu? It requires the cooperation of the forces, and that is what they are advocating. And that's why he's warning them, that they might change sooner than later if you do not need to couple together. That's the job of the...
but some of his actions, especially in the southeast region where you come from, could have contributed to the escalation of security challenges in that area, because people like Nnamdi Kanu, for example, were not popular when Buhari took over. But a lot of critics of this government say that his actions and what some people call sectionalism and nepotism has led the southeast to become another theater of insecurity.
I'm not going to absorb Mr. President 100%. But I would say, yes, in appointments, you can blame him, but on infrastructure, he's spreading the resources of the country the much he could across the north and south, east and west. And for me, infrastructure is key. If you don't appoint my people today as chief of army staff, there will be the next day. But if you lay solid foundation for the growth of the economy, it is going to... The rail he's rehabilitating was first here 100 years ago. The British left, did they live with the rails?
Well, very interesting indeed.
Yes.
Well, we'll have to move on to other stories now. A crisis between the federal government and some states may be brewing following a statement from the presidency that President Buhari has approved recommendations of a committee to review with dispatch, in quote, 368 grazing sites across 25 states in the country, in quote again, to determine the levels of encroachment. Now, the committee had recommended the collection of field data on 368 grazing reserves across 25 states to assess encroachment and encroachers, stakeholder engagements and sensitization. But less than 24 hours after the statement from the presidency, Governor of Benue State Samuel Ortom reacted. Ortom says that the present government has placed more priority on the welfare of cattle and herders than even the people that voted him into office. This was followed by reactions from Pan-Niger Delta Forum, Ohaneze Ndigbo, Afenifere, Middle Belt Forum, and the Christian Association of Nigeria. The socio-cultural and religious bodies all rose against the federal government's insistence on recovering grazing routes for herders in the country. And Osita, this seems to be another template for another crisis that's coming up again, because I mean these groups are all up in arms against the presidency, saying that why is President Buhari fixated on these grazing routes and all of that? They brought the National Livestock Transformation Plan, it didn't hold. They introduced Ruga, it didn't hold, and all of that. Why is President Buhari so fixated about this issue? Would we be right if we say that his critics are right by saying he's pursuing some agenda that seems to be as if he's protecting his Fulani stock, ethnic stock?
What I know in my years on earth, I've decided on two things. One, if I have a problem, my first agenda is, what's the solution? Instead of looking at what was said, what was not said, the 36 governors of the Federation, under the federal government of Nigeria, and the vice president that is chairman of the National Economic Council. The council is a constitutional body.
Chaired by the vice president.
Chaired by the vice president, by delegation of powers from Mr. President, same Mr. President. This council, sometimes in 2018, agreed that there's what they call the National Livestock Transformation Plan. And money was voted to start from one point to the other. And it's been demonstrated throughout history that what happened in America is the big ranches. What happened in Brazil is the big ranches. Unluckily, a few months ago, Governor Masari told us that Mr. President had voted 5 billion for the one in Castina. If I'm on top, I'm the governor of Enugu State, or that of Ekiti, or that of Sokoto, what I would do is to ask, because the governors are in charge of the land by constitution, what I will do is to say, gentlemen, let's carve out so hectares of land. Mr. President, I don't want to talk about the routes you are talking about. But I'm saying, you gave Casina 5 billion. Can we have our own 5 billion to start our own ranch in Enugu?
Very interesting.
And this ranch, I told the governor of Enugu State, I said what? When the Southern Governors Forum made this allegation, I said they were wrong. They were part of a meeting that had drawn a plan that is germane, practical, have been practiced, and the ranch you want to establish in Enugu, it mustn't be managed by a Fulani man.
Yeah, okay. We just have to go on a break.
And it mustn't be cattle
We'll come back, we'll continue
only.
with that conversation. Well, we just have to go on a short break now. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll continue with this discussion. Welcome back to This Week, where we hold the best of conversations and analysis. I'm Somna Sambo, and I still have with me in the studio Osita Okechukwu, who is the chieftain of the governing All Progressives Congress, and we're still taking a look at Mr. President's decision to recover some over 300 grazing routes in the country and the controversies that's already stoking among sociocultural groups, including even religious groups. And just like we were talking, you were trying to see how states could actually make some funds out of this plan
if it eventually goes on.
Yeah.
If His Excellency Governor J.K. Fayemi and his deputy Tambuwal, I will ask the governors, who among you want to go first, second, third, or fourth on ranches that we have agreed? Then we'll present to Mr. President that these are 20 states, or 25, or 31, or 19, or 10 that have agreed, have mapped out acres of land for ranches. Mark you, the ranch in Enugu State, if you don't want any Fulani man to be, even to carry water, you can do ranch without the Fulani man in your state.
Yeah, but we're talking of grazing routes in this
I'm
particular
trying to
instance.
say,
Yeah, I understand the angle that you're going.
Committee, please.
But a lot of people are saying that
note.
why did that committee not discuss ranching? Why were they talking of recovering grazing routes? And why is Mr. President fixated on grazing routes? Because these grazing routes seem to be more domiciled in the north and based on the 1964 law. So if that's the case, why do we have 25 states when we have 19 states in the north? So
no,
that
what I'm
means
saying,
yes, go ahead.
in simplicity, the farmers' settlers clashes could be categorized as a security issue in the country. It had consumed a lot of lives.
I mean, it has been
It had
all this
consumed
while.
a lot of properties. It had also leading us to food insecurity. If that's the case, there's a provision in the Constitution for emergency funds. What do? I said if I'm JK, His Excellency JK Fayemi and Tambuwal, governors, who amongst you have consulted your communities that are interested for ranch? Mr. President, this number of states are ready. Do us the thing you did in Castina, going by the National Livestock Transformation Plan. You are not arguing what Mr. President and the Chief of Staff had dusted up. One, to the best of my knowledge, is not a law. It's just a committee work.
Yeah, and a lot of people said that committee seemed to have been set up in secrecy because they don't understand when that committee was formed.
The point of the matter is that I've learned a lot of Nigerians forget that between now and May 29th, 2023, going by Mr. President's position in the Constitution, Mr. President will exit. But our own dear country will remain.
And the farmer-header clashes will remain.
No, the only way it could be reduced, we have some millions of cattle roaming around, but immediately you start real ranching, most of them will come near where you are because it's going to have grazing centers. It's going to have real equipment that will feed those. And it's not only cattle, for God's sake. Under the National Livestock Transformation Program, there's also the sheep, the goats, and even pigs if you want.
Very interesting.
But they are behaving as if you have ranch in Ekiti or in Enugu, it must be manned by a Fulani man. That's not the issue. The issue, instead of splitting hairs on a committee that Mr. President and the Chief of Staff is talking about, you call the attention that the National Economic Council of the country, by social date on 2018, how many years down? 3 years down the line, we have not buckled up. And the Southern Governors Forum behaved as if they were not part of that transformation
Well,
plan.
the thing is that they've already started enacting laws, and those laws will come to fruition in September. So, well, it's just that we just hope that they will make the best
No,
out
they
of
should
all
save
this
the country. They
situation
should
so
save the
that the country
country.
doesn't get into a crisis point. We have to move on to other stories now. Well, after a stressless takeover of government in Afghanistan, Taliban faces a new challenge of legitimacy as Afghans continue to protest their involvement in governance. Protesters took to the streets of even Kabul, the capital, to rally against Taliban rule for the second consecutive day. They kept marching around the capital city, including near the presidential palace. At one demonstration in the city, about 200 people had gathered before the Taliban broke it up violently. Though the Taliban had promised no vengeance against those they tagged as Western collaborators, but actions since they came into power in less than a week speak to the contrary. Experts in international affairs and diplomacy have warned of consequences for sub-Saharan Africa if the situation in Afghanistan is not checked. They believe the Taliban fighters will have more access to weapons now and will plan to extend their influence, especially to regions that are facing serious insurgency threats like Nigeria. Well, let's start from these guys who are happily in government, taking over government through the back door. And a lot of people across the world are calling for this new government to obey human rights, but we've seen a violation of human rights. People protesting that, look, this takeover of the government wasn't through the right procedure, although the president fled the country. What have you made of the takeover of the Taliban of Afghanistan all this time?
No, I feel bad of what happened there, and at the same time, there's no way it could spread to countries like Nigeria, because we have different scenarios.
Well, they are pursuing an Islamic ideology that seems to capture and conquer and indoctrinate people, even when they may not want to subscribe to that. So people are afraid that it's in tune with what Boko Haram's ideology was previously like.
They will ask themselves, why had Boko Haram not succeeded, in spite of their devastation? And some of us Christians are not even going to church. So you want now to convert me to Islam? But most people in Afghanistan are Muslims by birth. They have common belief. And those are old civilizations. For them, they see the West as an imperialist group. That's their credo.
And that's why, I mean, during their speech on the Afghan independence, they were saying that they had defeated 3 previous superpowers.
That is it.
The British, the Russians, and now the Americans.
No, before then, as far back as 303, they have defeated foreign invaders. So for them, it's a different kettle of fish. It cannot happen there. I'm giving you an example. Most of us Christians do not go to church. So you now want to convert the person to what? It won't happen. But what we're worried about is that our leadership should look into the main solution contents.
Do you think Nigeria should open up talks with Afghanistan, or we should just ignore the government because it's been ruled by the Taliban?
No, what we should concern ourselves, for instance, the Buhari agrarian revolution. A lot of people are not keyed into that agricultural program. One, it has what they call the anchor borrowers, where the setup is community-based. You access funds from federal government of Nigeria without collateral.
Well, that's been on for so many years now,
No,
since
no, no,
2015.
it's not some.
Well,
Because what is happening in Nigeria that is dangerous is a lot of people are idle. And an idle man is a devil's workshop.
yeah, and I ask you, let me return because this question is very critical. Do you think Nigeria should have relations with Afghanistan under the government of the Taliban?
Based on what? What do they have to offer?
Some other
They don't have nothing to offer.
because some other world powers are
When
ignoring them, but China
the
and
IMF,
China and Russia have embraced the Taliban.
they embrace them as a spite to America. In the long run, they might not offer them what they are looking for because they will soon be hungry. IMF has ceased doling out funds to them, and IMF for doling out more funds without collateral, what they did in this part of the world. So what are we saying? We don't need to anything to do with them. What do we have to learn from them?
Well, they're a country like us, so
No,
I
we
mean,
have nothing to
we'll
learn
definitely
from them.
have relations.
We are looking for those who help us to get our youth.
Well,
we have a 60-70% youth cadre.
Well, very interesting indeed.
Where you have youth cadre, you have to be
we must thank you, Osita Okechukwu, a chieftain of the All Progressives Congress, and also is the Director General of the Voice of Nigeria, though he's not here in that capacity. Well, we also thank our earlier guest, Bodisha Umi, who showed up and helped us discuss the PIA. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of This Week, on a very fantastic weekend where we've had coronation of the Oluofori and the marriage of Buhari's son and the Emir of Bichi's daughter. A very fantastic weekend. And from me and the entire team here in Abuja, goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambo.